Every night, for over 300,000 years, your ancestors went blind. Not partially, not metaphorically, functionally, completely blind. The sun dropped below the horizon, and the world they'd spent all day navigating just vanished. Everything out there in the dark that wanted to eat them could see perfectly fine. Most people hear this and immediately think fire. Fire was the solution. And yes, fire is part of the story. But fire wasn't just warmth. It wasn't just light. What fire actually did to ancient human survival at night is something most people have never thought all the way through. And once you understand it, you'll realize the campfire wasn't just a tool. It was a replacement for a sensory system your ancestors never had and couldn't grow. There's also something else. The way your brain responds to darkness tonight, the instincts buried in you that you've never had reason to examine, those didn't appear by accident. They're the direct result of hundreds of thousands of years of humans solving the same problem every single night, and they're still running inside you right now. Here's what we'll cover: why human night vision is genuinely worse than most people realize, what ancient humans did before fire, what fire actually changed, how they compensated for everything fire couldn't fix, and what all of it ended up doing to the human brain and to culture in ways that still shape your life today. Let's start with the biology, because the problem is worse than you probably think. Your eyes have two types of photoreceptors. Cones handle color and fine detail in daylight. Rods handle low light vision. You have roughly 120 million rods per eye, which sounds impressive, until you understand what was hunting ancient humans at night. A leopard's retina contains a layer of reflective tissue behind the photoreceptors called the tapetum lucidum. It acts like a biological mirror, bouncing available light back through the rods a second time. That's why predators' eyes glow in headlights. Cave lions had it, dire wolves had it, cave hyenas had it. Every major predator hunting ancient humans in the dark had eyes specifically evolved for low-light environments. You don't. In genuine darkness, even with fully dilated pupils, human visual acuity drops to almost nothing. Large shapes, vague motion at the edge of vision, nothing usable, nothing that would tell you whether what was moving toward you was wind through the grass, or the thing that had already decided you were dinner. For a medium-sized primate in a world full of apex predators, this wasn't just a disadvantage, it was a nightly death sentence for anyone who handled it wrong. So, here's what ancient humans did before fire. They did exactly what every other primate still does. When the sun went down, they climbed. They found trees with branches high enough that a ground predator's approach would be loud and difficult, and they stayed completely still until morning. Not because it was comfortable, because moving at night on the ground, blind, in a landscape full of things that could see you clearly, wasn't living dangerously, it was dying. The night, for millions of years, belonged entirely to everything else. Then came fire, and here's where most people's understanding stops. The obvious contributions fire made to human survival are warmth, cooked food, and light. All of that is true, but those are the surface level answers. What fire actually did at night was something more fundamental than any of them. Fire created a perimeter. Before fire, darkness started at your skin. After fire, darkness started 30 feet away. That is the actual revolution. Not the warmth, not the cooking, the 30 feet. A campfire generates usable light across a radius of roughly 30 feet in any direction. Inside that circle, ancient humans could see each other, see the ground, see anything approaching out of the dark, and the predators couldn't enter it. This wasn't just practical, it was biological. Modern lions in Africa avoid open fire instinctively, not because they learned to, because avoidance of fire is hardwired below the level of learned behavior. Cave lions had the same response. Cave hyenas, short-faced bears, dire wolves, all of them. The firelight drew a line that nothing designed to eat ancient humans would willingly cross, which means fire didn't just give humans light, it gave them a barrier that no weapon they possessed could have created on its own. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have documented something that shows exactly how central that barrier was. Sleeping adults rouse instinctively to tend a dying fire, without being woken, without being asked. Not because anyone trained them to, because the understanding that a dying fire means a collapsed perimeter is wired into the human nervous system, after 300,000 years of it meaning exactly that. But here's the part most people don't follow all the way through. Fire solved one problem, and immediately created another. Inside the circle, humans could see. Outside it, they still couldn't. Something was always out there, just beyond the edge of the firelight, in the part of the night fire couldn't reach. So over tens of thousands of years, ancient humans built something fire couldn't build for them. A compensatory sensory system, assembled not in any single individual, but across the whole group, passed down through generations. Sound became a survival language, not just the sounds of the night, but the architecture of silence within it. Every forest, every grassland, every landscape at night has a baseline of ambient noise. Insects, frogs, small animals moving through underbrush. Ancient humans learned to read that baseline the way we read text. When a section of the night went suddenly quiet, it meant something large had moved into that area. The direction the silence was spreading, the speed at which it expanded, told you what you needed to know and where it was heading. Researchers working with modern hunter-gatherer communities in Africa and South America have documented that experienced adults can identify the movement signatures of multiple distinct large animal species by ear alone and distinguish predator approach from prey movement in total darkness, a skill developed over a lifetime but rooted in tens of thousands of years of cultural transmission. That cold prickle at the back of your neck when a forest goes suddenly silent, that isn't anxiety. That's a 300,000-year-old early warning system, doing exactly what it was built for. Spatial memory was the second layer. Before a group made camp for the night, they already knew that landscape. They had moved through it during daylight. They knew where the terrain dropped away, where the water ran, where the game trails cut through the grass. Daytime movement wasn't just food acquisition, it was nighttime preparation. Ancient humans were memorizing the floor plan of their environment while they could still see it, because in a few hours they wouldn't be able to, and that knowledge was the difference between moving quietly and moving wrong.
This also explains something that seems counterintuitive. Hunter-gatherer groups moved camp far less frequently than the popular image suggests. A new location meant an unmapped night. Unknown terrain and darkness meant noise, disorientation, accidents, fire positioned wrong relative to the landscape. Familiarity with a campsite wasn't comfort. It was a tactical advantage that took days to build and couldn't be recovered in a single night if abandoned. And the camp itself was a designed response to blindness. Archaeological evidence from multiple prehistoric sites shows that sleeping positions were not random. Sleepers consistently oriented themselves with the fire between their bodies and the open surrounding landscape. The most vulnerable individuals, children, the injured, the elderly, were positioned farthest from the perimeter. The most capable adults slept closest to the edge of the light. There were no walls. There were no gates. What they built instead was a human perimeter, reinforcing a fire perimeter. The camp itself was an engineered solution to blindness, assembled from people rather than stone. Now, here's where the story gets genuinely strange. Everything up to this point, fire, sound reading, spatial memory, camp structure, solved the immediate survival problem of living without the ability to see at night. But those same conditions produced something else entirely, something completely unintended, something that ended up changing the species more than the darkness itself ever had. When ancient humans gathered inside that 30-foot circle every night, they were together, completely. There was nowhere to go. Darkness made leaving the perimeter functionally impossible, so people sat inside that ring of firelight for hours, every night, for hundreds of thousands of years, with nothing to do but exist in the same space. And they talked. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years documenting conversations among the Jew Huanzi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last groups on Earth still living something close to the original human pattern. What she found was stark. During daylight hours, roughly 80% of conversations were practical. Hunting logistics, food distribution, tool planning, resource disputes, work. But at night, around the fire, 81% of all conversation shifted into something else entirely. Stories, myths, tales of ancestors who did impossible things, explanations for why the world exists the way it does, jokes that made the whole camp laugh. Wiesner argued that firelight conversation is where human culture was born, not as an accident, as a direct structural consequence of the darkness. The night took away the ability to act, and in doing that, it forced ancient humans inward, into language, into narrative, into the construction of ideas about things that couldn't be seen or touched or hunted, the past, the future, the invisible forces behind visible events, things that only exist as stories. The campfire wasn't just a survival mechanism that happened to also produce culture. The darkness was the pressure that made both necessary, and both happened inside the same 30 feet. Your body still holds the record of all of it. A 2019 study found that viewing real campfire flames, not video simulations, produced measurable reductions in blood pressure and significant increases in feelings of social connection in participants. The longer the fire burned, the stronger the effect. Researchers proposed that the psychological response to fire may be neurologically embedded in humans in a way no other single stimulus replicates, a direct inheritance of hundreds of thousands of nights when the fire was the only line between the people inside the circle and the darkness outside it, the pull you feel toward an open flame. The reason a campfire makes people sit closer and talk longer. The way firelight feels fundamentally different from electric light, even when the illumination is technically equivalent. That isn't aesthetic preference. That's something much older than preference. We turned the lights on. We built walls and cities and screens bright enough to convince our brains that darkness no longer exists. We eliminated the thing that shaped 300,000 years of human behavior and called it progress. But the programming didn't go anywhere. The reflex that surfaces when a sound doesn't fit the pattern of the night. The instinct that makes total, unbroken darkness feel wrong in a way you can't quite articulate. The pull toward fire that electric light has never once fully replaced. Those aren't irrational responses. Those aren't leftover anxiety from a simpler time. That's 300,000 years of solved problems, still running inside you. The record of every night your ancestors survived in the dark. They couldn't see it, so they learned to listen. They memorized the world while they could still see it, and navigated it by memory when they couldn't. They built circles of light and human walls, and sat inside them every night and talked, until the stories became the thing that held them together. And then they woke up and did it again.